The other thing I did grow up in a family of carnival owners. Also, at an early age, they knew that I had retinitis pigmentosa and would eventually lose most, if not all, of my vision. So, but because of the way my family approaches things, the teachers, later on scoutmasters, I was able to graduate from a traditional high school and college. I'm one of the few blind Eagle Scouts.
Welcome to Story Power, a bi-monthly podcast where my guests and I geek out about the stories we are passionate about in all different genres, styles, and formats. My name is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden, and I started this podcast in the summer of 2020 at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. As I watched the reaction of my friends, family, and social media circle, I noticed that many people turned to stories for comfort and help in making sense of the craziness going on around them. My goal was to do the same for my listeners, but as I chatted with my guests throughout the first year, I discovered that their personal stories were the most fascinating thing about each episode. Neil Gaiman says, "Fairy tales are more than true not because they tell us that dragons exist, but because they tell us that dragons can be beaten." I now know that sharing our experiences with others helps us defeat our own dragons. It is our stories that connect us to one another. Let's see what wisdom today's guest has to share with us. Today is episode 72, and I'm talking to Max Ivey, the blind blogger. And Max, you have such an interesting story. I wanted you to tell about your family of carnival owners down to what you do now, because it sounds like what you do now is very interesting. And also you have a podcast, is that right? So do you want to, we have lots to talk about. So
probably more than we have time for. But
right, yeah.
I say that to people, and some of them think that it's an egotistical statement, and then I usually prove them wrong. So, but I grew up in a family of carnival owners in East Texas. My grandfather started a show that's on my mother's side of the family.
And
my
when
grandfather in the early 50s.
Okay, because we had a glitch with Zoom.
And on the other side of my family, on the Ivey side of the family, my grandfather was working in carnival games about that same time on the East Coast. So they're really, the fact that I ended up in the carnival business, wanted to be there and loved being there until I didn't, shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. And, I grew up, our family, we had a big piece of land out in what was the country then. My grandfather, he had deeded the land to the different kids so they could build homes or park mobile homes. And so there were 6 kids in my mom's side of the family. All of them were in the amusement business at one time or another. So, we've probably had more carnival rides in our yard than we had cars in our yard. It was just the way it was. And with all those people, there were lots of cousins, and there was some close quarters. So sometimes it was great, like holidays. There was lots of people and lots of food, and sometimes it was just like, please, I wish there was another 100 feet between us and y'all, because it's a little too close sometimes. So, and we never really had to worry about bullying, because when we went to school, there was always, you could throw a rock and hit a Wagner, Ivey, Server, Crouch, etc. So we never really had to worry about that too much. The other thing I did grow up in a family of carnival owners. Also, at an early age, they knew that I had retinitis pigmentosa and would eventually lose most, if not all, of my vision. So, but because of the way my family approaches things, the teachers, later on scoutmasters, I was able to graduate from a traditional high school and college. I'm one of the few blind Eagle Scouts. I worked for the Internal Revenue Service for a few years before coming back to the Carnival Midway in the early 90s. And I was very happy to get to work alongside my dad and my brothers for over 15 years before his death ended up causing the closure of our show. We just weren't ready to run the business without him yet. And About 3 years after he passed on, we ended up combining our rides with my Uncle Albert Wagner's carnival. And his carnival is still in business. He's the only one left of the Wagner, I guess you'd call it clan, although that's not a word that many people like to use anymore. But, the Wagner compound, let's call it,
Yeah.
But Wagner's Kiddie Carnival out of Corpus Christi, Texas, they call it a kiddie carnival. Why? I don't know. Maybe because of branding. They have about 35 rides. Their midway's worth several $1 million, and they travel from Corpus Christi to Nebraska and back every year. So at one time in my family, there were 4 carnivals operating out of Spring, Texas, all in the same family. He's the only one still left in the business. But after my dad's death, we ended up we sold what rides we had left. And eventually, my kiddie games weren't able to make money on his midway. They were great for a small show with 7 or 8 rides like ours, but they weren't capable of competing with games that were built for a midway of 25 or 30 rides and 30 or 40 games. So I knew that I had to have something else to do. And that's when I started helping other people sell their used carnival stuff. And I built a website called midwaymarketplace.com. And I did that in 2007, which is before WordPress, Facebook, or Wi-Fi. And I basically did it with no ability, talent, or experience, and especially with no money, but I did it. and being that I was a blind person doing this in 2007, I didn't have the option of WordPress or Drupal or Square or any of the great stuff that's out there now. So the first thing I had to do was teach myself how to code HTML. So I actually learned how to code the stuff that's on the backside of everybody's website. And I did that for 7 years with WordPress. And I'm very thankful for WordPress. I wouldn't build a website now without it, mainly because of all the what they call content management systems, which is what WordPress really is. It's the most accessible for a screen reader user like me. And I don't like to build sites on platforms where if I had to, I couldn't, jump in and do stuff. I don't mind asking other people for help. I love being able to hire other people to do stuff that I'm not great at. But I like the option of, okay, if everything, just went badly wrong and Max needed to do something on the back end of one of the websites he manages, could he still do it? So that's why I'm still a WordPress user. But just think about this. Not only did I have to teach myself how to code HTML, but in the first year or so, when I would upload an image to my website, I was using a 56K modem.
Oh, wow.
So just imagine, having to send images to a website and not having at least, 1 meg Wi-Fi or something.
Wow.
But, I just had to have a lot of patience. I had to realize that, that I probably was going to have to do them 2 or 3 or more times before they would finally get all the way there. So it was challenging. It was sometimes aggravating. And at that time, some of the year I was still traveling, which was actually pretty cool because when I was out on the midway working from behind the game lineup, I had access to my brother's data card from Sprint. So I had better internet on the road than I did at the house, but I enjoyed working from the house better because the house always had electric and running water. And, when you travel like we did, house trailers and motorhomes and stuff, the important thing is getting the carnival open. So sometimes the first day or two, you may not have water or electric or sewer. And some weeks, the only way you got clean clothes was taking them to town and washing them in a laundromat. So,
right. Yeah.
because that's one of the most important lessons I learned back in those days that I apply now, which was basically nobody cares what happens to the carnival owner during the week. They could care less if I've got a truck on the side of the road, if a kid is sick, if a generator is not working, if a truck gets stolen. All they want to know is, on Thursday or Friday night, can I ride the Ferris wheel or the tilt-a-whirl? Can I buy cotton candy or a funnel cake? And can I try to win me a stuffed animal? That's all that matters to the people week in and week out. And when you're around people like that from an early age, you learn, look, basically everything is a choice and you don't have a choice but to get open. So you become really good at finding solutions, at doing things you don't like doing because they're the best option at the time. And one of the things you get really good at is finding a positive way to look at things, no matter how bad they may be. As As my dad used to say, when people would ask him why he's laughing, he would say, "What good would it do me to cry about it?" So the other thing I really have only started thinking about recently more is that, people have finally convinced me that I'm a really good storyteller, even though I don't think I'm as good as my dad was. And I think I take a lot longer and use a lot more words than I need to. But storytelling is another thing that is a big part of the amusement world, because when you're getting rained out, when you're sitting on the side of the road, when you're out there and everything's up, but nobody shows, a lot of times the only thing you can do is to just pass the time, tell jokes, tell stories. Some of those stories are cautionary, and some of them are just pure entertainment when you think about stuff you did last year or 10 years ago and you laugh about it, So again, that's a very big part of the world I come from, and something that's been very helpful to me today. But yeah, just the whole idea of we just always had the viewpoint that somehow, some way we were going to get open, somehow, some way we were going to get to next season or next week or tomorrow. And I like to tell people that this is something most of them could do in their own lives, because most people have some difficult challenges they've been through.
Mm-hmm.
Problem is, they tend to focus on the challenges they went through that didn't end the way they wanted them to, as opposed to thinking about the ones where they did have some success, even if it wasn't 100% successful. If you play the good movies from your life on the screen inside your head versus the disasters, or at least the ones you recovered from, because as you know, if you've seen any of my work, most of my stories start out with bad stuff happening. They just end well,
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's the carnival days. And then I started the website, and then people were inspired by the way I managed to run the website and do all the stuff entailed in that by myself, and the fact that I'm blind. So they asked me to share more, and that led to the blindblogger.net, which since then I've written 4 books. I've traveled the country solo, sung and spoken in public. Let's see, I've been on hundreds of podcasts. I started my own podcast called What's Your Excuse? And I recently started a podcast network to help other people with disabilities launch their own shows or help them grow their existing audiences.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love it. Yeah, I love the title of your podcast, What's Your Excuse? Because so many of us just think, oh, I can't do that. I can't do that. And to hear your story, well, you probably were one of the first students to go through an actual, regular everyday school and not go to a special ed school or anything like that. And you were successful. So,
that's true. That was really the beginning of the whole mainstreaming effort. But I was very lucky because, as most teachers know, I'm sure you're very aware of this as an excellent teacher yourself, is a lot of this comes down to the district or the city or the town that you are going to school in, because there's a big disparity in wealth or income between school districts, depending on what part of the country or what part of the city they are located in. Now, my family was never wealthy. Some of my relatives did very well for themselves, but we lived in a school district that was affluent. So while I attended regular classes, I also had special education classes, but I also had access to orientation and mobility instructors to teach me about using the white cane and traveling safety. I had a Braille instructor. I was several times had one-on-one instruction in physical education, and our special education teachers or assistants, their goal wasn't to push us through the system and continue to get paid till we were too old not to get paid anymore. They were trained, or they were hired from institutions where their approach was to teach us to figure out a way to study or to educate ourselves using whatever skills and abilities we have at a given time. And I have to admit, I was a challenge for those teachers, because with retinitis pigmentosa, your vision isn't the same. It changes a lot. And in fact, in my lifetime, I had perfect vision until 4 or 5 years old. I had gradual vision loss until I entered junior high school, when I had a big drop off in vision. And that is pretty common among men with RP, that when they go through puberty, they'll have a big loss in vision, which is when I was first declared legally blind. And my vision stayed pretty constant until I went off to college. And then by the time I graduated from college, it was down to what it is now, which is light perception, which I find it's much easier just to tell people that I'm totally blind, because most people understand that better than light perception. And in fact, I understand it better than light perception myself. It's so my vision was constantly changing over the course of my education from elementary school to college. I've gone from being able to read a regular print or even a small print book in a dark room, to having to have a lot of light, to having to have a full-size book, to larger type books, to using a closed circuit monitor to put the book up on a screen, eventually to audio and braille. And that, if you think about that happened over the course of, let's say from third or fourth grade to graduation. That's what, 7, 8, 9 years. It's not a very long time. So the other thing that made it kind of difficult for my teachers is that I was always really good at math, and I wanted to continue taking courses in math, even more advanced courses in math. And as you know, a lot of that stuff is very visual and very hard to problem solve for.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Especially if you're doing geometry.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, because that's visual.
But yeah, I doubt anybody else would even have known to ask me that question. But you're right. That was really the beginning of the mainstreaming movement. And of course, it's like everything else. The pendulum goes back and forth, and there are still lots of private, specialized institutions for the visually impaired, the deafblind, etc. But for the most part, I think the movement is away from that even more strongly now, but not so much because of the parents or the government or the institution. I think the thing that's really pushing us in the other direction towards even more mainstreaming is the kids. These young kids have if you compare their ideas of what they think their potential is, as far as potential careers in their lifetime, with what I would have thought of in my lifetime. Forget the fact I grew up a carny. So, if just a kid in the 80s versus a kid in the 2020s, 40 years difference. The kids nowadays, they are not going to be put into boxes. They have some of the same dreams the sighted kids do, same for paraplegics, amputees, same pretty much anybody with a disability. It's like they see all these wide varieties of choices being caused by technology and just overall disruption of the usual economies. And they're like, yeah, some of us want some of that too. So I think a lot of it is the kids. And the best example I can think of, there's an organization called Envisions, and they have basically started taking over some of the Lighthouse for the Blind operations in the country and making them over to be more competitive. For example, in the manufacturing jobs they have, their goal isn't just for somebody to have a job. Their goal is for that person to progress outside of their job. So they really push their workers towards technical school education, towards college education, towards advanced degrees, towards being part of the design process, and not just design of new products, but also design of the manufacturing system. So they've really, taken a different, and they do this event called Level Up in the summer every year. They haven't done it since 2020 or 2019 because of COVID. But they bring high school kids from all over Oklahoma and Kansas and I think Nebraska, and expose them to various careers in the STEM fields. And I was there. I was an instructor. I was there to teach them soft skills. So I was there to teach them. At the end of the week, they totally blew my mind. They just stretched, changed, just totally blew up my idea of what was possible for even just for visually impaired kids, because some of the fields they worked on was aerospace, where they worked with an actual wind tunnel that belonged to Boeing and designed their own, what are them planes that fly remotely? Drones, yeah. There were people who did electrical engineering, and they redesigned 2 Power Wheels cars so that 2 kids that were part of the program who had missing limbs could drive the Power Wheels just like their neighbors up the street from them.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
So stuff like that they did during just a week. And I'm like, I come home from that week, I'm like, Max, I know what you're doing is good, man, but you need to find some other stuff to do because these kids are basically leaving you in the dust. So, but I think that a lot of that is, the kids, the teens, their parents, a lot of them see so much more as a way of possibility now. And I believe that's why we're going to see even more movement towards mainstream and inclusion in the traditional education system as opposed to specialized ed.
Yes. Well, I used to be a teacher at a high school, and my first actual teaching was substitute teaching. And I had a couple of long-term sub-assignments, but one of the things that Arizona did while I was teaching until 2008 was do that. They had inclusion. You had to have, they didn't have special, they might have had some special classes for the special ed kids, but mostly they were just included in the regular classrooms. And so they had classes for the teachers to help them integrate the students. So I think that's a really great thing. Personally, I loved it.
Yes. And the other thing is just imagine the benefits for the teachers and the students who aren't disabled.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
I mean, they are basically exposed every day to somebody like me who's going to challenge them to overcome their excuses and realize that many of their excuses are just that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So that's fantastic. So do you still help with the teaching? Are they having a level up this summer?
I don't know if they're going to have one this summer or not. I haven't been invited. I was part of a team that was actually, the leader of the team was a lady named Chelsea Nguyen, who runs a company called CN Vision Image Consulting, and her website is cnvisionimage.com. And she's the one who actually has the contract to do the instruction, and she picks her team based on what they want her to teach mostly that summer. So I haven't heard if they're going to do it this year or not, and if they're going to do it, if Max has been asked back or not. I don't know. If what I shared with them helped them, I'm sure they'll ask me back. But if there's some other types of trainings they want that Max ain't good at, Max is fine with that too.
Yes, right. Who knows what they're emphasizing this summer if they're doing it.
Yes, This is true. I should really find out about that. I'll send you an email and let you know whatever.
Oh, that would be cool. Yeah. Yeah, because they might be emphasizing something different than what your expertise is in. Yeah.
This is true.
So tell about your podcast. How often do you do it, and who are your guests, or do you have guests?
Come on. Just about every podcast host has guests because that's the easy way to do it, So for several years, I was promoting my Midway Marketplace before the Blind Blogger, doing podcast interviews, and eventually enough hosts asked me when I was going to have a podcast. I said, when I find a co-host, and that's the dangerous thing to say out loud because like a week later, a guy from Canada said, Max, I want to help you get online. So we started the show. Originally, it was called Leading You Out of the Darkness because that's the title of my first book, Leading You Out of the Darkness into the Light. And that was okay. Eventually, we heard more and more people say, if Max can do this, then what's my excuse? So we changed to no excuses. And then eventually we made it around to what's your excuse? And I interview people who have overcome adversity or thrived in spite of difficult life circumstances. I interview people who have actionable advice that may help my audience overcome their excuses. And I interview people who I just personally happen to find interesting or inspiring to me. And I have conversations with them, and they're generally, free flowing. We don't usually have much of a script. I like to start with, 2 or 3 good questions and just see where the world takes us from then on. And my recording schedule isn't set, but my goal is to release at least one new episode every week on Wednesday. Now, there are weeks where I may release 2 or 3 episodes in the week, but Wednesday is my release day. And that's the day I want people to remember to look for my podcast in their download feed. So if anybody goes to What's Your Excuse podcast, which they can find it through theblindblogger.net. I always appreciate those ratings and reviews. And I will even go further. If somebody leaves a review on my podcast and they tell me about it, I will definitely promote them on my social media channels because I believe in saying thank you and showing gratitude for people who go out of their way to do things for me that are helpful to me. So yeah, so that's one of the things. And I've been doing the show since 2016. We've done between my current version and the previous versions, we have 75 episodes. So not every week for sure, because if it was every week, I would have had something like 200 or 300 episodes by now. But, sometimes life gets in the way and sometimes technology gets in the way. And sometimes those are the same things.
Oh, really? Yes. I know what you mean. My husband helps me a little bit, but mostly I'm my only staff member. So since I teach and have a blog and I'm working on a novel and have the podcast, now I have a Patreon community. I only do my podcast every other week because I can't do the editing and the show notes and all that faster.
I love it. I am so impressed with you. I am for two reasons. One, because you found a schedule that is sustainable to you. Mm-hmm. And two, because you are doing what I tell my the people I've been working with lately on starting new podcasts. You're doing what I tell them to do. I recently wrote an article for the American Printing House for the Blind's website on this subject. And basically, a podcast should be a personal thing. You should make decisions based on what works for you, given your ability, skills, talents, equipment, and of course, budget at this time. Mm-hmm. Now, the odds are you will get better as you go along, and you may decide there are things you could have done better that you will as you go along. But podcasting is one of the great places because people are totally fine watching you learn while you're producing your podcast. I mean, it's one of the best ways actually to grow your audience because they get to see you as a real live human person being, as opposed to some produced podcast host that never makes any mistakes. It doesn't have any ums and ahs. So I really love what you did. I know of several podcasters who publish new episodes every other week or once a month. And as long as you stick to that schedule, you can totally crush the downloads and the listens and the rankings. So it's just total accident that I happen to be talking to you today, but you are a perfect example of what I try to tell people. And, it's one of those excuses. How many people do you think are not doing a podcast because they think they have to have X type of equipment? They think they have to edit. They think they have to do expansive show notes. They think they have to have a fancy intro and an outro, and they think they have to know what the heck they're doing. But none of that is true. Just basically, all of those are just excuses that hold us back. And yeah, there are people who are great. They can do step-by-step stuff and launch, and that's fine. But most of us, most people get good at podcasting. They stink at it for a while. That's how most people get good at this stuff.
Oh, that's right.
And I have said that in front of audiences, and first they laugh at me and then they smile at me because it's the truth.
It is the truth. And when I was writing my first novel, I'm working on my second one. I had this friend who was kind of helping me with it. And she said, your first draft is crap. So just accept that. Just accept that your first draft is going to be crap, but write it anyway. And then you can go back and fix it. Well, when I started my podcast, I didn't have any music with it. Yes. And, and then later I added an intro and an outro and all of that. But I have really enjoyed the progress that I'm making. And I do my own editing. My husband might take that over when he retires.
I love it. And, I like I tell people, there are lots of visually impaired people who are highly trained, skilled, wonderful audio editors. I'm not one of them. So until I can afford to hire somebody who is, I just put my podcast out there as recorded live, unedited. And the only real change I've made in that area is recently a friend said, Max, we know you do this and we love it, but people listening to you for the first time aren't going to know this. So for my last 3 releases, I have put a little disclaimer in before the player widget saying, hey, this is recorded live. It's not edited. but it's just like, some of the great television from the 50s would have been, and I'm sure you'll still enjoy it. So, and the other disclosure I've had to add, because again, this is something people who are new to the podcast don't know about, is I sing on my intro.
Oh.
And so some people are like, they don't know, they hear the music and they're like, well, they don't know where I'm going or what I'm going to do with that. So I have started putting that down also, that I do sing on the intro, that I started it back when the podcast was brand new because I didn't have a fancy intro or outro and I didn't want to put off recording my first episode. This was before I knew I was a podcaster. This was about 9 years ago. I was just wanting to record a video to try to push the sale of a carousel or some. I thought if the video could sell a carousel, because I had just sold a $150,000 ride because of the video. I thought if the video could sell a carousel, maybe the video could sell Max. So I went to record this, and I didn't have an intro and I didn't have an outro, and everybody was saying I had to have both. And I said, well, I know people used to make fun of my singing, and I know I stopped singing, but once upon a time, people thought I sounded pretty good. So why not just sing? So I sang. It was near the end of the year. I was trying to get my first video out before January 1st because, I'm one of those people. I like to finish the year strong as opposed to saying I'm going to do it next year.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm sitting there like December 30th. And I go, well, let's just do this. So I did a little bit of A Christmas Carol by Nat King Cole. And people really liked the singing as part of the video. And I've just kept it with me. And now I even have 2 songs that I find, so I don't always sing somebody else's music when I do my intros. But, we just added that in the show notes that, hey, Max is going to sing. It's part of the show, and it's something people expect by this time. And, for a long time, I sang Garth Brooks, and I used to joke that one of these days, Garth is going to find out I'm using his music, and he's either going to make me famous or he's going to send me a cease and desist letter. Either way, I'll go viral.
That's right.
Apparently, Garth and his agents don't care because I've never gotten either.
Oh, that's great. I love it. Well, okay. So we have about 5 minutes left, and I would like to continue this conversation. So I'm going to stop the recording now. There we go. Recording in progress. Now we're starting.
So you want me to tell that story again? Because I can.
Yes, please tell.
If you think it has merit.
Yes, tell the story again and then sing your song.
Okay, so as I mentioned, the Midway Marketplace led to the Blind Blogger, which led to books and podcast interviews in my own podcast. Well, last summer I sing a lot. I mentioned I sang on my first video, and people tend to enjoy it. So I sing covers. I find music from other people that I like, and I record singing them a cappella usually. And last summer, I found a song called Better Together by Luke Combs. And it's a really good song. I like the message, but I didn't like the part of the chorus. And the part of the chorus I didn't like was, it's like a match made up in heaven, like good old boys and beer. And after years on the Carnival Midways in Texas, I know that good old boys and beer and heaven to me just don't sound like they fit together. Because I've seen what happens when a bunch of drunk cowboys get riled up, So I changed it, and I'm going to do, like I said, I'm going to do most of the chorus because it helps me get the tune in my head right. So, the part I changed is the last 2 lines. So it goes like, "What's the point? What's the point of this old guitar if it ain't got no strings? And pouring your heart into a song that you ain't gonna sing, like having s'mores around a campfire or cotton candy at the county fair. And me, as long as you're right here." So I like the song, and funny thing about things in my life is it seems like whenever I do one thing, something else shows up, or somebody will come along and go, "Max, well, why don't you try this?" Which is why when I used to, one of the songs I've done a lot in public speaking and on my podcast is The River by Garth Brooks, because there really isn't a better song to express my life, both online and in person. This ever continuing, ever flowing river, and you just never know what's going to be around that next bend. So I usually sing Garth Brooks, and as I mentioned to you before, when we didn't know we weren't recording, one of these days he's either going to tell me how good I did it, or he's going to send me a cease and desist letter. And either way, I'll be famous. So far, I have tagged him on social media, including his agent, and either they don't care or they feel like, why give me attention? I'm not sure which. But so after that song, a friend from church said, Max, why don't you write your own song? And I said, I don't know how to write a song. I wouldn't know where to start. And she said, well, Max, how did you start everything else you've done in your life? She said, you started by doing one small piece of it, didn't you? I said, yeah, I guess so. She said, so why don't you see if you can't write one line, one word, or, come up with, maybe just a few bars of melody in your head and take it from there. Well, some people are going to hate me when I tell them this. I actually sat down and did just what she told me to do. And 45 minutes later, I had 3 verses of the song called If You Don't Ask, which is based on what my daddy used to teach me back in the day. He used to say, if you don't ask, they can't say yes. And really that came out of the fact that I was trying to book a 7-ride carnival in Texas where everybody else had 3 times as many rides as we did. And I got told no a lot. And I'd get tired and disgusted. And I'd go, hey, I ain't going to do this no more. And he would go, Max, if you don't ask, they can't say yes. Now stop complaining and call that next number. And eventually you call enough people and you fill in most of your calendar and you can make a living with a small carnival in Texas. So the first song I did was about that. And the verses in it are basically, about things that only happen if you ask. So that's my first song. And currently I'm working on a second one called What's Your Excuse? Because over the years, many people have said, hey, if Max can do it, then what's my excuse? Max has no formal training in songwriting, arranging. He cannot, nor has he ever been able to play a musical instrument. The only thing Max can do is sing. And in fact, 2 years ago, when I tried doing karaoke to the river of all songs, I stuck the place up until the 3rd verse until I finally got straight with the timing on the screen. So Max has no talent, but somebody challenged me to do it. I did it one little thing at a time. And the current song is called What's Your Excuse? And you said it'd be okay if I did part of the song for y'all. So,
oh, yes.
Okay. I will warn y'all in advance. I've been told that the chorus does tend to get stuck in people's heads. Okay.
So that's good.
People used to make fun of my singing. My school choir told me to lip sync. Kept singing because I really loved it. Singing to myself, hiding my gift. When I needed an intro, I thought, why not? Then I sang in church and at DreamCon. Then I'm the singing speaker closing talks with song. And now the scared singer has written 2 songs. If I can do it, what's your excuse? What's holding you back or what's stopping you? Go on and do it or what's there to lose? If I can do it, what's your excuse? Now, I know it still needs some work. It'd be great if I could find me a musician or 2 to help me, round it out some. But I like it. I think it's really, and the other 2 verses are just as motivational as that one. They all kind of tell some of my story throughout my life that I hope will encourage others when they hear it.
Oh yes, I like it too. I like it a lot. It's sort of okay, maybe this is a really silly analogy, but it's in a way, it's a country rap kind of a song because it has the same, tune and it goes back and forth. I don't know.
Yeah,
it's really great. I like it.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you like it. I tend to think of like 12-bar blues, like, African-American from the 50s or 40s, from Louisiana or from Tennessee. Mm-hmm. And I tend to think of it more, like that. Yeah. But now that you mention it, I could see where with the right help, it could work just as good as a rap song. I could definitely see that you're right too. So, and that's a really cool thing. That's when you've got a great song. And I hate to say that because I have a real hard time accepting the value of my own work. I usually have to have somebody else tell me it's good. So thank you for telling me you liked it. But to me, one of the things, when you have a really good song, is it has the potential to affect people in more than one style.
Yes, right. This is maybe another silly analogy, but I remember when Whitney Houston took Dolly Parton's song, it was for the movie The Bodyguard, and Dolly Parton, it was the one that Dolly Parton wrote when she broke up her partnership with whoever it was.
Are you talking about I Will Always Love You?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm getting old. I can't remember stuff sometimes. Yes, and Dolly Parton said she heard Whitney Houston's version of it. She was driving in the car and she heard it on the radio and she had to stop the car and just listen to it because she thought it was so great the way she had arranged it. And it was different than the way Dolly Parton had sung it, but she loved the new version of it. So
and that's especially encouraging because Dolly could not have sung that song the way she did.
Oh no, right. Yeah.
She doesn't have that range.
No, right. But I love that she wrote the song and she praised somebody who took what she did and made it different, made it more personal to them or whatever. I won't say better because it's not really better. It's just different.
Well, hey, I'm totally open to the idea of somebody taking this song and selling 1 million or 10 million copies of it in their own version, as long as I get paid, As long as I get a royalty check out of it somewhere,
Right. Yeah.
But I tell you, I share this about my music because I think it's one of the things I do that is it should show people that there are things that do scare me and make me very nervous, but I do them anyway because I've gone from somebody who people literally made fun of my singing to being afraid to sing in public, and then doing it because I really didn't have any other option at the time, not having a choice. Mm-hmm. And then find out that people enjoyed it to the point that if you look at some of my YouTube stats, you will see pretty quickly that people like listening to me sing better than they like listening to me talk. At least according to YouTube, but even now it still makes me nervous. So, if I'm standing at the mic and I've finished the talk and I go to sing, not every time, but every once in a while, I actually have to take several deep breaths and I have to pause. I was doing a virtual summit back in January called Leap and Shine. The organizers from the UK. It's put on by some of my long-term online friends like Mara Sweeney, the ambassador of happiness, and Clara Rufe, and some other people I've known for years. Mm-hmm. But for some reason, that particular day, I was nervous. And I probably wasted 30 seconds before I started singing. And I was singing the second verse of The River. But it's just one of those things. It's because it was so personally damaging to me for a while, it still causes me nerves when I have to do it. Now, the funny thing about this, though, is I am still afraid of the idea of singing with other musicians, and I've yet to figure out how to sing with a backing track or with a karaoke track. I know there's a way because other people do it. I haven't figured it out yet, but here's the thing. I've talked to many musicians who perform in front of large audiences, and they are shocked when they find out that I do live a cappella because they're like, Max, you're crazy. You're nuts. That would scare the heck out of me. And I'm like, yeah, well, what you do would probably scare the heck out of me too. But it's basically, I guess it's your individual fears. I've probably been asked to or allowed to sing on probably 30 or 40 podcasts now, and it's always been a cappella. So I've got some practice and some good memories to help me with nerves. If I had to stand, and I've had some really good experiences at public speaking events when I have sung to begin or end my talks. So, but it would be another thing. It would be different with musicians in front of a larger audience. But this leads me to one of my favorite quotes, which is from Star Wars. It's from Yoda, but it's not the quote people are expecting. There's a point where Yoda is trying to tell Luke how strong he is in the Force, and he tells him to lift that entire starship that he would.
Mm-hmm.
And Yoda said, and he says, you can't. It's huge. And Yoda says, there is no big or small. There only is. And so, we're talking, I'm kind of talking out loud here with you with the idea of singing in public. Well, at the end of it, it's all still the same thing. It would be me singing songs I know well or have written that I've sung a bunch of times in the past and should have no problem with. So if and when I get to that point where I'm going to be in front of a live audience with musicians, I know that it will turn out just fine. I know that I'll be able to handle it because it's really not bigger. It's just different. And a lot of times we get ourselves all twisted up because we think something's bigger. I remember the first time I went on a podcast and the host sent me this email confirming my appearance, and I read all the way down to the bottom. I wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything. And in his signature, it says that his regular audience is over 50,000 people. So for about 5 minutes, I was really messed up. Feels like I did not need to know how many people. And now that I do know, I'm not sure I want to be on this podcast. But eventually I came back to my same approach, which is, hey, I'm telling Max's story. There isn't a question he can ask Max that Max doesn't have an answer to or can't come up with an answer to. And so don't worry about it. And that's what I ended up doing. And I had to do the same thing at a public speaking event at the beginning of the pandemic in Florida. I was speaking at a podcasting conference, and they thought about canceling it because people were starting to lock down and airlines were starting to cancel flights. But they went ahead. I was speaking in the podcast 101 track to encourage people to start a podcast, and of course, I was speaking about facing fears and overcoming excuses. But when I got there, for some reason, I missed an email, I guess. When I got there, I didn't know that I was going to be following Dave Jackson. Now, for those who don't know Dave Jackson, he is a legend in the podcasting world. He has literally helped launch over 1,000 podcasts in his career with his School of Podcasting. He's been responsible for many of the, top 10, top 100 shows in their particular niches. So I'm sitting in the back and I hear them introduce Dave Jackson. I'm like, oh, heck, Max, what did you do now? But then I went back to my usual place. I'm like, well, I'm going to go up here and tell people I'm going to tell people to, not to let the excuses keep them from launching their podcast. I'm going to tell my stories of the bad things that have happened and how it made people love me anyway. And I'm going to share some examples from more established podcasters who've had rocky beginnings. And then I'm going to tell them, hey, if I can do it, what's your excuse? So that's what I did. And I actually really leaned into that because when I went to the mic, they introduced me. And I said, okay, y'all have spent all day now learning how to start a great podcast from the beginning. Now I'm fixing to tell you my take on starting a great podcast. In my opinion, you only get good by being bad for a while first. And I got a good laugh, and I've eventually. So the audience was encouraged, and I got a standing ovation. The only thing I didn't get is I didn't get a video because nobody had cameras set up in the room I was speaking in. But it was just one of those really great experiences. It went from I was scared to no, I can do this to it was a great experience. So
yes. Well, I was going to say that some of the most famous actors say they choose their roles according to the ones that scare them the most. That's how they choose their roles. If they're afraid to do it, they know, oh, this is the one I should be doing because it's going to stretch them and make them grow as an actor. So,
Well, I recently spoke with a host who said, Max, I think that you are addicted to challenge, that you just aren't happy unless you've got something else to master. And I said, I think that's a fairly negative statement. I told him my initial reaction is that just doesn't sound like something I would say. It sounds negative. I said, but what I will admit to is being comfortable, being uncomfortable. So.
Yes. And I'm not sure we're taught to do that. We have to be perfect all the time. Lots of people think they have to be perfect all the time. And I have a saying, there are no mistakes. They're just lessons.
Well, I kind of accept the fact that there are mistakes, but I think of mistakes as lessons. I think of them as happy accidents. But here's the way I look at mistakes. I like to tell people it's like this. There's nothing. The worst thing isn't making a mistake. The worst thing is being afraid of making mistakes.
Right. Yeah.
So the other thing I agree with you 100% on is people are so worried about not being perfect, about appearing to be silly or, I don't like using the failure word, but, they're afraid to be seen as a failure by the people around them or the people online. So there are things they don't try because they don't want to look bad. But here's the thing. Life ain't the Olympics. They're not going to give us style points no matter how much you want them. So stop trying to win them. There aren't 5 judges with cards that say you got a 6 or a 9 or it's just the only thing that matters. Well, some of the things that matter are, did you accomplish your goal? Did you learn from it if you didn't? Did you see it as an experience and get some sort of educational value from the attempt? There's so many great things can come from it, but you have to be willing to fall on your butt. You have to be willing to look silly. You have to be willing to have other people look at you, with those looks like, man, who is she and why is she taking that kind of a risk?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes and sometimes you get a little bit over your skis, to borrow the sports expression, and you do something a little beyond your ability, and you end up looking like a total butthole. But then, what's really great about looking like a total idiot is if you're smart about it and you keep good notes, you have great stories to tell. And
that's true. Yes.
Yes. And as an author, I know you can appreciate this. My editor, Lorraine Regularly, who she runs a company called at wordingwell.com. Without her, I probably would have still published my books, but it would have taken longer and they wouldn't have been as good, or they wouldn't be as good since I'm working on my next one. But she likes to say, Max, you get into more stuff, and I'm editing that for her because she's an honest Canadian. You get into more stuff than any one person I've ever always come out of it smelling like a rose and with a good story. I'm like, yeah. Most of the time, every once in a while, I've had to be rescued, but even being rescued can be good if it's because of something you did, because you have all these great friends and a supportive community online. Sometimes being rescued can even be a great part of the story, because how many other people know somebody that would rescue them? I mean, if you tried something way beyond your abilities and ended up just totally lost in a small town on the other side of the world, let's say, how many people could count on somebody showing up to help them get back home again?
Right.
And so even that sort of thing can be great. Even having to be rescued can be cool if you have people willing to do the rescuing.
That's right.
Just my opinion.
Well,
but that again plays into the whole idea of we have to be perfect and self-sufficient and totally independent.
Well, I think that being independent is overrated. I'm really into community, partly because of my theater background. It's a collaborative art. You've got all these people working on the production, and you couldn't do the production if you didn't have the lights or the sound or the costumes. Well, I suppose you could do it without the costumes and the setting. And,
but then you'd have kabuki.
Right. Or you'd have Shakespeare. Because my teaching partner is a theater professional, and we don't have a theater on our little campus in Sierra Vista. Cochise College has multiple campuses, and the Sierra Vista campus doesn't have a theater. So we did our plays on the library steps or in the library commons, so
I love it.
Found spaces and a minimal amount of set, and but still, you still have to have that collaboration because the actors have to work together and so on and so forth. So
yeah. This is one of these things. It's kind of weird that I do this, because one of the things that they generally teach the visually impaired and other people with disabilities is that you need to be super independent, that you need to find ways to do everything for yourself. But I got to read a great book by accident a few years. Well, it's probably been about 10 years ago now by Tom Sullivan, who is a famous singer, performer, entertainer. He had a segment on Good Morning America for a while. He's a documentary filmmaker. He's all of those things who happens to be blind because that's the way he sees himself and introduces himself. He wrote a great book called Seeing Lessons or Hearing Lessons, Things I Learned in the Dark, where he was the first person I ever heard talk about interdependence and just really explain it and make it make sense. And so I've made it one of my goals to really help people to understand interdependence and to appreciate it as much, if not more so, than independence, and to build those communities that lead to collaboration. But the problem is a lot of people still don't like the idea of having to ask for help, getting help when someone offers it. And so I tried to think of a way to explain this to people that would help them understand it and maybe release some of the ego that keeps them from collaborating and allowing people to be part of their journey. I finally came up with this expression. When you refuse to ask, you rob the other person of the joy they would have received from helping you.
That's right. Yeah.
So in effect, you're making somebody else's life more dreary by not reaching out to them and allowing them to help. And first, think about how good you feel about yourself when you have to do something nice for another person who can do nothing for you but say thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We all feel better when we do something nice for our neighbor, family member, coworker, student, whatever. We all feel better. So just think about somebody that spent 15 or 20 or 30 years of their life mastering a skill or perfecting a talent or studying and accumulating information. Just imagine how good you will make them feel if you go up to them and go, look, I know that you are the expert in this field and I am really struggling with this. It would really help me out if you could answer some of my questions and give me some help in this area. And more often than not, they're going to say yes, because you are giving them the opportunity to find joy in something they've got a lot of investment in. I just wish more people would realize they're making other people's lives harder by not asking them for their help or for their collaboration.
I know, you're right. And I can say that in my own family because my husband is a Mac geek. I mean, he's been using the Macintosh since the 80s when it first came out, and he's been using it for creative purposes, graphic arts and other things. He read all the books and magazines. I used to call myself a computer widow because he would read, he would be busy. And now he has a whole bunch of tech podcasts that he listens to. And sometimes I don't want to bother him because he has his own projects. But one time when I said, I don't want to bother you, he said, how come you didn't ask me for help? And I said, well, because I don't want to bother you. I know you're busy doing your own stuff. And he goes, that's why I'm here, to help you do something. I went, oh, okay. He goes, I want to help you. It's not, you're not going to bother me. So I've started asking him for help more often than I used to. So,
yeah. Well, that's the way it works. Sometimes it's, it takes having that conversation and realizing that the other person actually would like to do more. And
right. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, the other part of this that's very difficult for a lot of people is when somebody comes along and offers to help them and they don't remember actually asking for help. Now, that really puts people's backs up because their usual response to someone offering is, I'm doing really fine by myself. I don't know why you think I need help. And so I think you ought to go help somebody who really needs your help at this time. And, that's the way most people respond because they don't think that they asked you. And they may not have asked out loud. They may not have sent an email, right. but they could have prayed about it. They could have meditated about it. They could have mumbled to themselves about it. They could have cursed out loud about it and somebody overheard them in the next apartment. You just never know. The main thing, the more important point here is there are people in the world, either people who know you or people who are just good listeners or intuitive, who will will know that you have things you could use help with, even if you don't think that you said it out loud. And I challenge most people to go back and look through their social media posts, their blog posts, their comments on their blog or their podcast, and see if before they got help, if they weren't, maybe just a couple of words here and there, sounding like somebody who was frustrated, somebody who was troubled, somebody who was aggravated. And the thing is we put a lot of that stuff out into the world without realizing we're doing it. And if that runs across in front of somebody who, like I say, they're naturally intuitive, or they're naturally good listeners, or they know us really well, then those people, a lot of them will just have no choice in their minds but to offer to help. So when that happens, I encourage you to say thank you, take their advice or their actual help, and then implement their advice and, show your appreciation, whatever ways you're comfortable. If you honestly don't think you need their help, please just remember it took them more courage to offer to help you than it would have taken you to ask. So please treat them gently and kindly, because the next time that they think they should offer to help, they may decide not to because of the way you responded to their offer.
Right.
But it really is true. We put a lot of stuff out into the world, body language with people we meet face to face, or even on Zoom. Some people, can pick stuff up from your facial stuff or from your chat box posts or whatever. So we are constantly telling people stuff we don't want them to know about us. Most people don't notice, but the ones who do and want to help, please be kind to them. So
that's right.
And that's the whole thing about collaboration, is when we allow people to be part of our stories and our journeys, we can accomplish our goals much more quickly with less strain and more joy. And at the end, think about it this way. Assuming you could do this big, crazy, scary thing you want to do by yourself, when you succeed, who are you going to invite to the party?
That's right. Exactly.
I mean, if you have a whole troop of people that helped you accomplish it, most of them may even kick in for the beer. You just never know.
That's right.
But,
we're running out of time, and
I'm sorry.
No, I think that's a great place to end. Do you have anything? We have about 5 minutes. Do you have anything else you want to say besides that?
No, I'd just like to remind people of my website, theblindblogger.net. They're more than welcome to send me an email to justask@theblindblogger.net. The podcast network for people with disabilities and their supporters is at wyexcuse.com. And I would love to hear from people if they want to start a podcast, need help growing their podcast, or say they are a totally able-bodied person that wants to support me in the network. I'd love to hear from them. Again, that's wyexcuse.com. And if they want to find and listen to my podcast, which I hope they do, they can go to theblindblogger.net. They can search for me on any of the podcast platforms, or they can tell Alexa and Google, hey, play What's Your Excuse? So that's right. And the most important thing I hope people learn from me today is Max is not perfect. Max is not unique. Max just keeps trying new stuff and making new mistakes and learning from it and going forward. So the most important lesson I hope I taught you today is to do one thing, even if it scares you, especially if it scares you. Do one thing, no matter how big or small. Do one thing that gets you closer to your goal.
That's great. I love that. Thank you so much for being my guest.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And the one thing I like to make sure I share with the host is this. I started doing podcast interviews in 2013 because I had no way to meet people face to face. I've continued doing them because I enjoy having these conversations. But I just want you to know, if it wasn't for you and a whole bunch of other people like you who gave me the opportunity to get in front of their audience, there wouldn't be a Max Ivey, the blind blogger. What's your excuse? None of this stuff would have happened because nobody would have known who the heck I am without people like you. And I just want to know how much I truly appreciate the time, the effort, the money, and the passion you put into making this a great show for people like me to come on.
Well, thank you so much. And you, the same to you. It's great to have great guests.
Well, you're welcome.
Before I go, I'd like to give a big shout out to Podmatch, which I call a dating service for podcasters. Since I joined their platform, I have met so many wonderful people from all over the world, and they make the matches so easy that if you are a podcaster or you have a message that you want to share, you might want to consider checking them out. The affiliate link is at the bottom of my show notes on my website at Sage-Woman Chronicles at sagewoman.life. Part of what I love about them is that they promote civil conversations, and can't we use that right now? So if you check them out, tell them Lucinda sent you. I'd also like to invite you to my Patreon community, where we will have chats with authors or creators. We'll have member chats about the stories that they love, and occasionally we'll have extra episodes or uncut episodes of Story Power. So please go check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/storypower without the hyphen, all one word. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you like what you heard, please share it with a friend and give us a review on your favorite podcast app. It will help people find us. You'll find the show notes for this episode at my website, Sage Woman Chronicles at sagewoman.life. You can leave a comment there. And remember, as Philip Pullman said, after nourishment, shelter, and companionship, stories are the thing we need most in the world. Until next time, this is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden. Thanks for listening.